The mining station Kepler 442b hung in space like a broken tooth, its hull scarred by years of asteroid impacts and hasty repairs. Commander Jake Morrison pressed his face against the observation deck's reinforced glass, watching another shipment of refined titanium drift toward the Zilithian cargo vessel. The aliens never bothered to dock properly. They just extended their gravitational tethers and pulled the containers into their massive ship's belly like a whale feeding on krill. Same routine every month, muttered Chief Engineer Sarah Chun, joining him at the window. They take our materials, leave us enough food and supplies to barely survive, and treat us like we're some kind of useful bacteria. Jake nodded grimly. For 3 years, humanity had been under Zilithian rule. The conquest hadn't been violent. It hadn't needed to be. The Zilithian Empire simply appeared one day with ships the size of cities and technology that made Earth's most advanced weapons look like pointed sticks. They offered a simple choice: serve as miners and laborers, or watch every human settlement burn from orbit. Most chose to live. The Zilithians weren't cruel masters, just indifferent ones. They saw humans the way humans might view trained dogs, useful for specific tasks, but hardly worthy of respect or fear. The galaxy's dominant species, the Zilithians had conquered 17 different civilizations over the past millennium. Humanity was just another entry in their ledger. Morrison, a voice crackled over the comm system. Report to Bay 7. Now, Jake recognized the tone of Overseer Kethril, the station's Zilithian administrator. The alien rarely spoke to humans directly unless something was wrong. Jake made his way through the station's cramped corridors, past groups of exhausted miners heading to their 12-hour shifts. The air recycling system wheezed constantly, another reminder of how little the Zilithians cared about human comfort. Bay 7 housed the station's main communication array. When Jake arrived, he found Kethril waiting alongside 2 figures he'd never seen before: a human woman in a crisp military uniform and a tall, elegant Zilithian with silver markings on his chitinous exoskeleton. Commander Morrison, Kethril's translated voice buzzed through the universal translator. You will accompany diplomatic envoy Thessarian and human liaison officer Captain Elena Vasquez to the homeworld. Your expertise in mining operations is required for treaty negotiations. Jake blinked in surprise. Treaty negotiations? The silver-marked Zilithian, Thessarian, stepped forward. His translator produced a voice like warm honey over steel. The Empire is expanding its mining operations to include gas giant harvesting. We require human consultation on efficiency improvements. Captain Vasquez extended her hand to Jake. She was maybe 40, with short-cropped brown hair and eyes that had seen too much. I'm Elena Vasquez, formerly of the Earth Defense Corps. I've been working as a liaison between human colonies and the Empire for 2 years now. Jake shook her hand, noting the calluses and scars that spoke of combat experience. I thought the Earth Defense Corps was disbanded after the surrender. It was. Elena's smile held no warmth. Some of us found other ways to serve humanity's interests. Within 6 hours, Jake found himself aboard a Zilithian diplomatic vessel, staring out at stars he'd never seen. The ship was a marvel of engineering: smooth corridors that seemed to flow like water, gravity fields that adjusted automatically to each passenger's homeworld preference, and a central garden that somehow contained a small forest complete with alien birds. First time off station in 3 years? Elena asked, finding him in the observation lounge. First time off any human settlement since the occupation began, Jake admitted. This ship is incredible. Wait until you see the homeworld. Elena settled into a chair that molded itself to her body. The Zilithians don't just build cities, they grow them. Living buildings that adapt to their inhabitants' needs, transportation networks that are essentially massive organisms, art that changes based on who's viewing it. Jake studied her expression. You sound like you admire them. I respect them, Elena corrected. They're not evil, Jake. They're just beyond us. To them, we're what ants might be to us, potentially useful, but not really worth considering as equals. That's what makes them dangerous, Jake said quietly. Elena raised an eyebrow. How so? They underestimate us because they think they understand us completely. Jake turned back to the stars. But humans have a talent for survival that doesn't show up in their databases. The journey to the Zilithian homeworld took 8 days. During that time, Jake learned more about the galaxy than he'd discovered in his entire life. The Zilithian Empire controlled over 40 star systems, with a total population exceeding 200 billion. They had eliminated poverty, disease, and want from their society through a combination of advanced technology and rigid social hierarchy. Each Zilithian was born into a specific caste: worker, warrior, technician, administrator, or ruling class. Their genetics were optimized for their role, and their education was tailored to maximize their efficiency within the system. It was a perfect society, as long as you accepted that perfection required absolute conformity. Humans confuse them, Elena explained during one of their conversations. We don't fit their model. We're too adaptable, too unpredictable. A human can be a poet one day and a soldier the next. A farmer can become a scientist. A laborer can become a leader. They can't categorize us properly. Is that why they keep us as minors? Jake asked. Because it's the only role they can understand us in? Partly, but also because they think it's all we're capable of. Elena leaned forward. Jake, what I'm about to tell you stays between us. There's a resistance movement among the human colonies. Nothing dramatic. We're not planning suicide attacks or hopeless rebellions. But we're gathering information, building networks, preparing for opportunities. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. What kind of opportunities? The kind that might let humanity prove we're more than just useful animals. When they finally arrived at the Zilithian homeworld, Jake understood what Elena meant about growing cities. The planet's surface was covered in structures that seemed to breathe, their walls shifting colors with the rhythm of some vast heartbeat. Spires twisted up into the atmosphere like enormous vines, connected by bridges that sparkled with bioluminescent patterns. The diplomatic vessel settled onto a landing pad that felt warm and slightly yielding beneath their feet. As they disembarked, Jake noticed other ships, some clearly Zilithian, others belonging to species he didn't recognize. The Empire has representatives from all their subject worlds here for the expansion negotiations, Thessarian explained as he led them through customs. The processing was remarkably efficient. Devices that looked like flowering plants scanned them with beams of colored light, apparently reading everything from their biometrics to their emotional state. Their accommodation was in a section of the city designated for off-world visitors. Jake's room was a marvel of adaptive architecture. The walls, furniture, and even the lighting adjusted automatically to human preferences. When he touched a wall, it became transparent, revealing a view of the city that took his breath away. Millions of Zilithians moved through the living corridors below, their movements creating patterns like flocking birds. Transport pods flowed along organic highways, and, in the distance, Jake could see what looked like a waterfall flowing upward into the sky. A soft chime announced a visitor. Elena entered, no longer wearing her military uniform. Instead, she wore a simple gray outfit that seemed to shimmer with its own light. Adaptive clothing, she explained, noticing his stare. It responds to environmental conditions and social situations. Very practical. Elena, Jake said carefully, what exactly are we really doing here? She moved to the window and activated some kind of privacy shield. The glass became opaque, and Jake felt a subtle humming that suggested sound dampening. The Zilithians are planning something big, she said without preamble. Bigger than gas giant mining. Intelligence suggests they're preparing for war with another empire, the consortium of Vectar. It would be the largest conflict in galactic history. Jake felt the blood drain from his face. What does that mean for humanity? If the Zilithians lose, the Vectar will likely exterminate every human in the galaxy. They view other species as potential threats to be eliminated. If the Zilithians win, Elena paused. Well, they'll probably expand their empire even further, with humans serving as their eternal labor force. So we're trapped between two alien empires that either want to enslave us or kill us. Unless we find a third option. Elena turned to face him. Jake, you're here because you're one of the few humans who understands large-scale industrial operations. But you're also here because our intelligence network identified you as someone with the right combination of skills and mindset for what we're planning. Which is, Elena smiled, and for the first time since he'd met her, it reached her eyes. We're going to give both empires exactly what they deserve. The next morning, Jake attended his first diplomatic session. The meeting chamber was a vast space with organic walls that seemed to grow upward into infinity. Representatives from dozens of species sat in sections that had automatically configured to their biological needs. Aquatic beings in water-filled enclosures, gaseous entities in specialized atmospheric bubbles, and crystalline creatures on surfaces that resonated with harmonic frequencies. The humans sat in a small section near the back, clearly viewed as minor participants in the proceedings. Jake counted maybe 30 humans total, scattered among representatives from civilizations that commanded fleets of thousands of ships. At the center of the chamber stood a raised dais where the Zilithian High Council held court. Jake immediately understood why Elena had described them as beyond human understanding. The council members were enormous, even by Zilithian standards, their exoskeletons gleaming with patterns that seemed to shift and flow like living metal. When they spoke, their voices resonated through the chamber with harmonic frequencies that Jake felt in his bones. The expansion into Sector Gamma 7 will require unprecedented resource extraction capabilities, announced High Counselor ZYTHKar, the most imposing of the group. Preliminary surveys indicate gas giant deposits sufficient to fuel our defensive preparations for the coming conflict. A representative from the aquatic Morhai species raised a tentacled appendage. High Counselor, the Morhai engineering guilds can provide atmospheric processors capable of converting gas giant materials into usable compounds at 97% efficiency. The crystalline hegemony offers resonance extractors that can separate rare elements at the molecular level, added another representative, their voice like wind chimes in a hurricane. As the session continued, Jake began to understand the scope of what was being planned. The Zilithian Empire wasn't just preparing for war, they were preparing to strip mine entire star systems to fuel their war machine. Gas giants would be drained of their atmospheres, asteroid belts completely harvested, and entire solar systems left as empty space. But what struck Jake most was how the various species competed to offer their services. Each seemed desperate to prove their worth to the Empire, to secure their place in the hierarchy by demonstrating superior technology or efficiency. Except for the humans. When High Counselor ZYTHKar finally acknowledged their section, his tone carried the same indifference Jake had grown accustomed to on the mining station. Human representatives will provide consultation on labor-intensive extraction methods. Your species' adaptability makes you suitable for operations in hostile environments where automated systems might fail. That was it. 30 humans representing billions of their species, and they were acknowledged for perhaps 30 seconds before the council moved on to more important matters. During the recess, Jake found himself standing in one of the chamber's side gardens, trying to process what he'd witnessed. The Zilithians were planning an industrial operation that would make their previous conquests look like small-scale mining operations. Overwhelming, isn't it? Thessarian appeared beside him, moving with the fluid grace that all Zilithians seemed to possess. It's massive, Jake agreed. I had no idea the scope of what you're planning. The Vectar Consortium represents an existential threat to ordered civilization, Thessarian explained. They are a collective consciousness, billions of individual minds linked into a single, aggressive entity. They do not negotiate, they do not surrender, and they do not show mercy. The only response to such a threat is overwhelming force. Jake nodded thoughtfully. And you're certain this is the only way? Human Morrison, you must understand. The Vectar have already consumed 17 lesser civilizations. Their expansion follows a predictable pattern. They assimilate useful technologies and exterminate everything else. If they reach core empire systems, billions will die. I understand the threat, Jake said carefully. I'm just wondering if there might be alternatives to strip mining entire star systems. Thessarian's head tilted in what Jake had learned was the Zilithian equivalent of mild amusement. Your species' tendency toward inefficient emotional decision-making is well documented. However, this situation requires logical responses based on mathematical probabilities. The Empire has calculated the resource requirements necessary to achieve victory. There are no alternatives. After Thessarian left, Jake remained in the garden, studying the alien plants around him. Each one was perfectly designed for its environment, optimized for maximum efficiency within its role. Nothing was wasted, nothing was out of place. It was exactly the kind of thinking that might get the entire Zilithian Empire killed. That evening, Elena knocked on his door carrying what appeared to be a simple meal of human-compatible food. "Privacy mode again," she said as soon as she entered. The room's walls immediately shifted to their opaque configuration. "The Resistance has been monitoring Vectar communications for 2 years," she said without preamble. "They're not exactly what the Zilithians think they are." Jake set down his fork, meaning, the collective consciousness part is accurate. But the Zilithians assume that means the Vectar think like a giant computer, logical, predictable, following programmed responses. Elena pulled out a small device that projected a holographic star map. What they don't realize is that the Vectar collective includes the emotional and psychological patterns of every species they've absorbed. They're not coldly logical. They're a seething mass of accumulated hatred, fear, and survival instincts from hundreds of different civilizations. Jake studied the map, noting the Vectar expansion pattern. They're not expanding randomly. Exactly. They're targeting specific types of worlds, not just resource-rich planets, but civilizations with particular psychological profiles. Elena highlighted several conquered systems. They're collecting experiences, Jake. Every species they absorb adds new dimensions to their collective consciousness. And they want the Zilithians because the Zilithians represent perfect order, complete social control, absolute hierarchy, total efficiency. Elena's expression was grim. Imagine what the Vectar could accomplish if they absorbed that level of organizational capability. Jake felt pieces clicking together in his mind. But they also want humanity. Yes, because humans represent the exact opposite of Zilithian order. We're chaos, adaptability, the ability to find solutions outside established parameters. Elena leaned forward. "Jake, both empires are heading toward a war that will devastate this entire sector of the galaxy. But there's a third factor they haven't considered, which is..." Elena smiled that dangerous smile again. "What happens when chaos and order work together instead of against each other?" Jake spent the next 3 days attending diplomatic sessions and technical consultations, but his mind was racing with implications. The Zilithians were preparing for a conventional war against an enemy that was anything but conventional. Meanwhile, the Vectar were apparently building towards some kind of psychological weapon disguised as military expansion. And somewhere in the middle, humanity was positioned as the galaxy's most underestimated wild card. On the 4th day, everything changed. Jake was reviewing gas giant extraction protocols when alarms began sounding throughout the city. The harmonic tones that normally provided background ambience shifted to urgent, discordant patterns that made his teeth ache. Elena burst into his room without bothering to knock. Vectar scout ships just entered the outer system. 3 of them. Through his window, Jake could see the city's defensive systems activating. Spires that had appeared decorative suddenly revealed themselves as weapon platforms, their organic surfaces splitting open to expose crystalline arrays that hummed with barely contained energy. "Just 3 ships?" Jake asked. "Against this entire planet's defenses?" "That's what has everyone worried," Elena replied. "The Vectar don't make symbolic gestures. If they sent 3 ships, it's because 3 ships can accomplish their objective." The intercom system crackled to life with Thessarian's voice. "All off-world representatives report to emergency assembly chambers immediately." As they hurried through corridors filled with efficiently moving Zilithians, Jake noticed something that chilled him. Despite the emergency, despite the first direct Vectar incursion into Empire space, the Zilithians showed no fear, no panic, no emotional response whatsoever. They were responding to the crisis exactly the way their programming dictated they should. "Elena," Jake said quietly as they reached the assembly chamber, "I think I understand what the Vectar really want." She looked at him questioningly. "They don't want to conquer the Empire," he continued. "They want to break it." The emergency assembly chamber buzzed with controlled chaos as representatives from 47 different species tried to process what was happening. Jake watched the main display screen show 3 small Vectar vessels approaching the planet's outer defensive grid. They looked almost insignificant against the massive Zilithian defense platforms, tiny silver needles against a web of fortress-sized weapons. High Counselor HFY stood at the center of the chamber, his massive form radiating the same calm authority Jake had observed throughout the diplomatic sessions. When he spoke, his translated voice carried no trace of concern. Vector vessels have violated Empire space. Defense protocols are engaging automatically. All off-world representatives will remain in protective custody until the threat is neutralized. Jake noticed Elena's grip tighten on her data pad. She was monitoring something, probably resistance communications that the Zilithians couldn't intercept. Protective custody, muttered the more high representative beside them. They mean imprisonment. On the screen, the defense grid opened fire. Beams of coherent energy lanced out toward the approaching Vector ships, each blast containing enough power to vaporize a small asteroid. The attacks should have destroyed the intruders instantly. Instead, something impossible happened. The energy beams curved around the Vector vessels like water flowing around stones. Not deflected by shields or absorbed by armor. Literally bent through space as if the ships existed in a different dimension. Gravitational manipulation, breathed the crystalline hegemony representative. They're warping spacetime itself. More weapons fired from the defense platforms. Projectile weapons, plasma cannons, exotic particle beams. Everything the Empire's engineers had developed over a millennium of conquest. All of it flowed harmlessly around the three small ships. Jake felt Elena tense beside him. She was reading something on her data pad that made her face go pale. Citizens of the Zilithian Empire. A new voice suddenly filled the chamber. It came from everywhere and nowhere, resonating through the walls themselves rather than the communication system. We are the Vector Collective. We bring greetings from the 17 civilizations you believe we destroyed. The voice was wrong in ways that made Jake's skin crawl. It wasn't one voice, but thousands, maybe millions, all speaking in perfect unison. Male and female tones, different species vocal patterns, all blended into a harmony that suggested vast intelligence and complete madness. We have come to offer you a choice, the collective voice continued. Join us willingly, and your individual consciousness will be preserved within our greater whole. Your knowledge, your experiences, your perfect order will enrich us all. High Counselor HFY activated his personal communicator. Defense Command, implement Protocol 7. Full planetary bombardment of the intruding vessels. Defense Command acknowledges, came the response. Protocol 7 initiated. On the screen, Jake watched the planet's most powerful weapons emerge from hidden positions. These weren't defensive platforms, but offensive weapons capable of cracking moons. The energy discharge would be visible from neighboring star systems. The weapons fired simultaneously. For a moment, the space around the Vector ships became a miniature star, brilliant beyond description. When the light faded, all three vessels remained unharmed. Your weapons cannot touch us, the collective voice observed with what sounded like mild amusement. We exist partially outside your dimensional framework. But that is not why we have come. One of the Vector ships moved closer to the planet, passing through the defensive grid as if it wasn't there. As it approached, Jake could see its true size, not small at all, but compact. The ship's hull seemed to shift and flow like liquid metal, and patterns of light moved across its surface in ways that hurt to look at directly. We have observed your species for many cycles, Zilithians. Your order is perfect, your efficiency absolute. You have eliminated chaos from your civilization completely. The voice paused, and Jake heard something like sadness in the harmonized tones. This is why you will lose. Elena grabbed Jake's arm. Look at the other species representatives, she whispered. Jake glanced around the chamber and saw something that made his blood freeze. The non-Zilithian representatives were beginning to move in unison. Small movements at first, a synchronized turn of the head, identical postures, breathing patterns that matched perfectly. The collective grows stronger with each consciousness that joins us, the voice explained. Already, your subject species feel our call. The more high understand that individual thought leads to suffering. The crystalline hegemony recognizes the beauty of shared consciousness. The thermal key have realized that separate existence is merely an illusion. More representatives began moving in sync. Their eyes remained their own, but their bodies responded to some external will. Jake noticed that only the humans seemed unaffected. Your empire's greatest strength is also its fatal weakness. The collective voice continued. You have created perfect order by eliminating the one force that makes life truly strong: unpredictability. High Counselor ZYTH turned to his subordinates. Initiate emergency protocols. All non-Zalithian personnel are to be isolated immediately. But his security forces didn't respond. They stood motionless, their own minds apparently caught between Zalithian conditioning and Vectar influence. Elena pulled out her communicator and spoke in rapid, coded language that Jake didn't recognize. Whatever response she received made her face go white. "Jake," she said urgently, "we need to get out of here. Now. The Resistance has an extraction plan." "No." Elena's voice was tight with fear. "The Resistance is gone. Every human colony, every ship, every outpost, they've all gone silent simultaneously." Jake felt the world shift around him. The Vectar got them? We don't know. But something happened 47 minutes ago, and now we're the only humans left who are still in contact with each other. On the screen, more Vectar ships began materializing around the planet. Not 3 vessels now, but hundreds. They appeared without any energy signature, simply sliding into normal space as if they had always been there. "Zalithians," the collective voice spoke again, "your subjects understand what you cannot. Individual consciousness is pain. Separate existence is suffering. We offer unity, shared purpose, the end of loneliness and doubt." Jake watched as more non-Zalithian representatives began moving in perfect synchronization. But something was wrong with the process. Their faces showed strain, as if they were fighting against the influence even as their bodies responded to it. "The collective is not conquest," the voice explained. "It is evolution. Each consciousness that joins us adds new dimensions to our existence. Your mathematical precision, combined with the creative chaos we have absorbed from other species, will create something greater than either could achieve alone." Elena tugged at Jake's sleeve. "There's a service corridor behind the Morhai section. If we can reach it while they're distracted." But before Jake could respond, High Counselor ZYTH did something unexpected. Instead of continuing his attempts to contact security forces, he turned directly toward the human section of the chamber. "Human Morrison," his translated voice carried a note Jake had never heard before: uncertainty. "Your species appears to be unaffected by the collective's influence. Explain this anomaly." Jake felt every eye in the chamber focus on him. Zalithians, half-controlled alien representatives, and, somewhere in the walls themselves, the attention of the Vectar collective. "I don't know," he answered honestly. "Maybe we're just too chaotic for them to grab hold of." "Interesting," the collective voice mused. "The humans remained stubbornly individual. This was unexpected." On the screen, Jake could see Vectar ships taking positions around the planet's major cities. They weren't attacking or landing, just waiting. "Humans of Earth," the voice addressed them directly. "You are unusual. Your minds resist our harmony in ways we have not encountered before. This intrigues us." Elena was now openly working on her communicator, apparently trying to establish contact with anyone from the Human Resistance Network. "We offer you the same choice we have offered your masters," the collective continued. "Join us willingly, and we will preserve what makes you unique within our greater consciousness. Refuse, and, well, chaos cannot be allowed to exist indefinitely." Jake felt a crazy idea beginning to form in his mind. What if we don't choose either option? The chamber fell silent. Even the Zalithians seemed surprised by his question. "Explain," the collective voice demanded. "You want order and chaos to combine," Jake said, standing up despite Elena's attempts to pull him back down. "The Zalithians have perfect order, humans have pure chaos. But you're going about it wrong." High Counselor ZYTH turned his massive head toward Jake. "Human Morrison, this is not the time for theoretical discussions." "Actually, it's exactly the time," Jake replied. "Because I think both of you are missing something important." He pointed at the screen showing the Vectar ships. "You say you've absorbed 17 civilizations, but you still need more. You need the Zalithians' order and humanity's chaos." "Why?" "Because perfection requires all elements," the collective responded. "No," Jake shook his head. "Because you're not actually creating anything new. You're just collecting. like a museum that keeps adding exhibits, but never uses them. Elena had stopped trying to pull him down and was staring at him with a mixture of horror and fascination. The 17 civilizations you absorbed, are they really still alive within you? Or are they just echoes? Memories of what they used to be. Silence stretched through the chamber. They are preserved. The collective finally answered, but Jake heard something defensive in the harmonized voices. That's not the same thing as being alive, Jake pressed. And you know it. That's why you need fresh chaos, fresh order. Because what you have is slowly dying. The Vectar ships on the screen began moving closer to the planet's surface. Human Morrison, High Counselor of HFY's voice carried a warning. You are provoking a response that could result in planetary annihilation. Maybe, Jake agreed. Or maybe I'm pointing out that both sides are fighting the wrong war. He turned to address the chamber as a whole. The Vectar think unity through forced consciousness merger is evolution. The Zilithians think perfect order through rigid hierarchy is advancement. But what if you're both wrong? Elena finally succeeded in getting a response on her communicator. She listened for a moment, then whispered urgently to Jake. The human colonies aren't gone. They've gone into hiding. Deep hiding. Jake felt pieces clicking together in his mind. How deep? Underground. Underwater. Some have sealed themselves into asteroid mining facilities and gone completely dark. Elena's eyes were bright with sudden understanding. Jake, they're not hiding from the Vectar or the Zilithians. They're hiding from the choice, Jake finished. Because humans don't like being told there are only two options. The collective voice spoke again, and this time Jake heard something new in it, uncertainty. Humans of Earth, you speak of alternatives that do not exist. There is order or chaos, unity or division, evolution or extinction. According to who? Jake challenged. You've absorbed 17 civilizations, but have you ever tried working with one? Really working together, not absorbing or conquering or ruling. High Counselor ZYDHCar made a sound that Jake's translator couldn't interpret. Human Morrison, cooperation between species requires clear hierarchy and defined roles. Without structure, there is only chaos. And, with too much structure, there's only stagnation, Jake replied. But what if there's a third way? On the screen, something was happening to the Vectar ships. Their perfect formations were beginning to show small variations, tiny movements that didn't match the others. Impossible, the collective voice said, but now it sounded less unified. Some of the component voices were slightly out of sync. Elena grabbed Jake's arm. Whatever you're doing, it's working. Keep talking. Jake took a deep breath. The thing about humans is that we're not actually pure chaos. We're adaptive. We can work within order when it makes sense, and break out of it when it doesn't. We cooperate when cooperation works, and compete when competition drives better results. He gestured toward the screen. You want to absorb us because you think chaos plus order equals perfection. But that's addition. What you really need is multiplication. Explain this concept, the collective demanded, and Jake noticed that several voices were now speaking slightly off rhythm from the others. Order times chaos doesn't equal absorbed consciousness, Jake said. It equals innovation, growth, actual evolution instead of just collection. The chamber was now completely silent except for the soft humming of the translation systems. The Zilithians have created a perfect society, Jake continued. But perfection can't grow. The Vectar have created perfect unity, but unity without individual thought can't adapt. What if, instead of one absorbing the other, you work together? Impossible, High Counselor ZYTHCar stated flatly. Cooperation requires clear hierarchy. Does it? Jake turned to Elena. Show them. Elena hesitated for a moment, then activated her communicator's projection system. A holographic image filled the center of the chamber, a star map showing human settlements throughout Zilithian space. But these weren't the mining colonies and labor stations that appeared in official records. These were something else entirely. For 3 years, humans have been building hidden infrastructure throughout Empire space, Elena announced. Not military installations or weapons platforms. Research stations, manufacturing facilities, communication networks. The map showed an intricate web of human activity that the Zilithians had never detected. Stations buried in asteroid fields, underwater cities on oceanic worlds, research facilities built into the cores of dead moons. We've been studying both Zilithian technology and what we could learn about Vectar capabilities, Elena continued. Not to fight either of you, but to understand you. High Counselor ZYTHKar stared at the projection. This infrastructure network, it should not be possible to hide such extensive operations from Empire surveillance. It shouldn't be, Elena agreed. Unless you had help from people who understood your surveillance systems from the inside. Jake watched understanding dawn on the Zilithian leader's face. You have been working with Empire citizens. Volunteers, Elena corrected. Zilithians who were curious about human unpredictability, who wanted to see what would happen if order and chaos worked together instead of against each other. On the screen, the Vectar ships were showing more pronounced variations in their movements. Individual vessels were breaking formation, following slightly different patterns. This is unexpected, the collective voice admitted, and now Jake could clearly hear individual voices speaking at different times. The concept of voluntary cooperation between species without absorption or hierarchy. We have no template for this scenario. Jake stepped forward. That's because you've been thinking about it wrong. Both of you have. You see other species as problems to be solved, either by controlling them or absorbing them. But what if they're actually solutions to problems you don't even know you have? He pointed at the projection of human settlements. Every one of these facilities was built using a combination of human adaptability and Zilithian engineering principles. We couldn't have done it without both. Elena manipulated the display to show one of the hidden stations in detail. It was unlike anything Jake had ever seen. Organic curves that suggested Zilithian biotechnology, but organized in patterns that seemed almost random until you realized they were optimized for flexibility rather than efficiency. This is Station Harmony, Elena explained. It's been operational for 18 months. The population is 60% human, 40% Zilithian volunteers. They've developed technologies that neither species could create alone. High Counselor ZYTHKar studied the design with obvious fascination. The energy efficiency ratings are impressive, but the structural organization violates fundamental engineering principles. And yet it works, Jake pointed out. Better than either pure human or pure Zilithian designs. The collective voice spoke again, but now it was clearly multiple voices speaking in loose harmony rather than perfect unison. This is not evolution. This is collaboration, which is just another word for evolution that doesn't require someone to die, Jake replied. Elena was monitoring her communicator again. Jake, I'm getting reports from the hidden stations. The Vectar influence isn't affecting the mixed populations the same way it's affecting pure species groups. Of course it's not, Jake said with sudden understanding. The collective works by creating resonance between similar consciousness patterns. But if you've got humans and Zilithians working together, their consciousness patterns are already mixed. There's nothing pure for the collective to grab onto. On the screen, several Vectar ships had now broken formation entirely. They were moving in what looked like random patterns, but Jake was beginning to see the underlying structure. They were experimenting. Collective consciousness expanding, multiple voices announced from the speakers. New patterns emerging. Individual thoughts integrating with unity structure. High Counselor ZYTHKar turned toward his communications console. Defense Command, status of Vectar vessels? Unknown, High Counselor. Their behavior has become unpredictable. Jake felt excitement building in his chest. They're not breaking down, they're evolving. Real evolution. What if instead of the Vectar absorbing the Empire, or the Empire destroying the Vectar, both of you learn to work with something that's neither order nor chaos, but both at the same time? The massive Zilithian was quiet for a long moment. The concept has theoretical merit, he finally admitted. But implementation would require fundamental changes to Empire's social structure. And the collective would need to accept individual consciousness as a permanent part of unity, Jake added, addressing the Vectar ships. Not temporary aberrations to be eventually absorbed. On the screen, the Vectar vessels had formed entirely new patterns. Instead of rigid formations or chaotic swarms, they were moving in dynamic configurations that shifted and adapted moment by moment. Proposal acknowledged, the voices from the speakers announced. Trial cooperation protocols acceptable for evaluation period. Elena was shaking her head in amazement. Jake, do you realize what you've just done? Started the most dangerous experiment in galactic history, he suggested. Changed everything, she corrected. Both empires came here prepared for war. Instead, you've given them a reason to try something that's never been attempted before. Jake looked around the chamber at representatives from dozens of species, all struggling with consciousness patterns that were no longer purely their own, but not yet fully absorbed either. The hard part hasn't even started yet, he said quietly. This is just the beginning. 3 weeks after first contact with the Vectar Collective, Jake found himself in the most unlikely place in the galaxy. A conference room aboard a joint Zilithian Vectar vessel, helping plan the future of 3 civilizations. The ship itself was a marvel that shouldn't have been possible. Zilithian biotechnology merged seamlessly with Vectar dimensional manipulation, creating spaces that existed in multiple realities simultaneously. Jake could walk down a corridor that was simultaneously a Zilithian organic tunnel and a Vectar phase-shifted chamber, depending on how his consciousness chose to perceive it. The resource allocation models are still problematic, announced Technician Corval, a Zilithian engineer who had volunteered for the cooperation project. Human unpredictability factors make long-term planning difficult. Across the table, the Vectar representative nodded with 3 different heads simultaneously. The collective had learned to manifest individual spokesperson entities for meetings, though each one contained the consciousness patterns of dozens of absorbed species. Agreed, the Vectar entity replied in a voice that blended harmonic frequencies from multiple civilizations. Human chaos parameters exceed computational models. However, this appears to generate innovation coefficients far beyond projected baselines. Jake rubbed his temples, fighting off the headache that came from spending too much time in multidimensional space. Can we try that again in simple language? Elena, who had become the unofficial human ambassador, translated with practiced ease. He's saying that humans are impossible to plan for. But that's actually a good thing, because we keep coming up with solutions nobody expected. Through the conference room's impossible windows, Jake could see the experimental station that had become the center of the cooperation project. Station Nexus existed partially in normal space and partially in the Vectar's dimensional framework, with sections that could shift between realities as needed. Zilithian organic architecture grew alongside Vectar crystalline structures, while human-designed chaos zones provided spaces where the unexpected could flourish. The population of Nexus had grown to over 50,000 beings in 3 weeks. Humans, Zilithians, and individual consciousness fragments that the Vectar Collective was learning to release for independent operation. What they were building together defied every established principle of galactic civilization. Status report from Section 7, announced Dr. Sarah Chun, who had been transferred from the mining station to lead human scientific operations. The joint research teams have developed a new form of faster-than-light communication that doesn't require dimensional shifting or organic relay networks. Explain the mechanism, requested Technician Corval. We're not entirely sure how it works, Sarah admitted with a grin that made the Zilithian's head tilt in confusion. The human teams kept experimenting with random configurations while the Vectar consciousness fragments provided harmonic resonance patterns. The Zilithian engineering protocols kept everything stable. Somehow, the combination created something none of us understood individually. The Vectar representatives' 3 heads conferred with each other in rapid harmonics before responding. Innovation through cooperative unpredictability. This concept continues to generate results outside established parameters. Jake watched the alien representatives struggle with concepts that humans took for granted. Collaboration without hierarchy, success without complete understanding, innovation through managed chaos. But the real challenge wasn't technical. It was political. Elena activated the main display, showing a galactic map with color-coded territorial boundaries. We're getting reports from across Empire space. The cooperation experiment isn't being received well by everyone. Large sections of Zilithian territory were marked in red, indicating systems where local governors had declared the cooperation project a contamination event and sealed their borders. Meanwhile, portions of Vectar space showed similar resistance, with some collective fragments refusing to participate in consciousness release experiments. High Counselor HFY has been replaced by a hardline faction that views the cooperation project as a threat to empire stability, Elena continued. They're calling it consciousness pollution and demanding a return to proper hierarchical order. Similarly, the primary collective consciousness has declared the individual release protocols an error that must be corrected, added the Vectar representative. Many absorption units refuse to acknowledge independent consciousness fragments as legitimate. Jake felt a familiar chill. So both empires are having civil wars. Not wars, Elena corrected. Schisms. The Zilithians are splitting between traditional hierarchists and cooperation advocates. The Vectar are fragmenting between collective consciousness purists and individual recognition supporters. And everyone who opposes the cooperation project sees humanity as the root cause, Sarah added grimly. The main display shifted to show movement patterns in both empire and collective space. Massive fleets were repositioning themselves along new boundary lines that hadn't existed a month ago. Estimated timeline for open conflict? Asked technician Corval. 47 days, Elena replied. Maybe less if something triggers an incident. Jake stared at the tactical display, watching the slow-motion collapse of galactic peace. We've created exactly what we were trying to prevent. A three-way war instead of a two-way one. Not war. The Vectar representative corrected. Evolution pressure. Species adaptation through crisis. That's a fancy way of saying we've made things worse, Jake said flatly. But, even as he spoke, he noticed something odd about the fleet movements. The positioning wasn't entirely defensive or aggressive. There were patterns that suggested something else. Elena, can you show me the human settlement locations again? Elena overlaid the hidden human infrastructure on the tactical display. Jake studied the pattern for several minutes, his mind racing. The opposing fleets aren't just taking defensive positions, he realized. They're surrounding our hidden settlements. Confirmed, said technician Corval after running rapid calculations. Both traditional Zilithian forces and primary collective units are converging on human infrastructure locations. Elena's face went pale. They're planning to eliminate humanity entirely. Remove the chaos factor from the equation. Logical response to contamination threat, the Vectar representative observed clinically. Eliminate source of unpredictability. Restore stable binary conflict parameters. Jake felt anger building in his chest. So your solution is genocide? Not genocide. Technician Corval corrected with typical Zilithian precision. Selective removal of destabilizing elements to preserve larger population stability. That's exactly what genocide is, Sarah snapped. You're just using more polite language. The conference room fell silent except for the subtle harmonic vibrations that kept the multidimensional space stable. Jake watched through the windows as construction continued on Station Nexus. Beings from 3 different civilizations working together to build something unprecedented. We need to evacuate the hidden settlements, Elena said finally. Get everyone to Nexus or other protected locations. Evacuation impossible, technician Corval replied. Settlement populations exceed available transport capacity by factor of 23. Besides, Jake said quietly, running away won't solve the fundamental problem. Everyone turned to look at him. Both empires have decided that cooperation is too dangerous to allow, he continued. They think the solution is to eliminate humanity and return to stable binary conflict. But they're still thinking about this wrong. Jake stood up and moved to the display controls. Elena, show me everything. All the human settlements, all the cooperation projects, all the mixed species facilities. The display filled with data points scattered across dozens of star systems. What had started as a small network of hidden research stations had grown into something much larger. Look at the pattern, Jake said. We're not just hiding anymore. We're connecting things. He manipulated the display to show communication links between settlements. Human settlements are serving as bridges between Zilithian and Vectar space. Places where both empires can interact without direct contact. Bridge consciousness, the Vectar representative said with sudden understanding. Intermediate states allowing gradual adaptation rather than revolutionary change. Exactly. But the hardliners in both empires see bridges as threats because bridges change everything they connect. Sarah was studying the data with growing excitement. Jake, look at the innovation rates coming out of the mixed settlements. They're not just higher than pure species facilities, they're exponentially higher. Jake nodded grimly, which is exactly why the traditionalists want to destroy them. Innovation is just another word for uncontrolled change. Elena pulled up another set of data. There's something else. The mixed settlements aren't just developing new technologies. They're developing new social structures, new ways of organizing consciousness and cooperation. On the screen, Jake could see reports from dozens of facilities. Zolithians learning to function without rigid hierarchy. Vector consciousness fragments discovering individual creativity. Humans adapting to work within both ordered and unified systems. We're accidentally creating a fourth option, he realized. Not empire order, not collective unity, and not human chaos. Something that includes all three, which terrifies everyone who's invested in the existing systems, Elena added. The Vector representative was conferring rapidly with its multiple consciousness streams. Query: what response do humans propose to current threat situation? Jake looked around the conference room at beings from 3 civilizations, all struggling to find a solution that didn't involve massive death and destruction. We do what humans do best, he said finally. We refuse to accept that the options on the table are the only options available. He turned back to the display. Elena, how many of the hidden settlements have defensive capabilities? None. They were built for research and cooperation, not warfare. How many could be evacuated to defensible positions? Maybe 10% if we started immediately. And how long do we have before the fleets reach firing positions? 36 days. Jake felt the familiar sensation of pieces clicking together in his mind. What if we don't try to defend the settlements or evacuate them? Jake, Elena said carefully, if we don't defend or evacuate them, they'll be destroyed. Not if they're not there when the fleets arrive. Technician Corval tilted his head. Explain this concept. Jake grinned, feeling the rush that came with a truly dangerous idea. The Vector can exist in multiple dimensional states simultaneously. The Zolithians can grow structures that adapt to changing conditions. Humans can improvise solutions that shouldn't work, but do anyway. Sarah was beginning to smile. You want to move the settlements. Not move them. Transform them. Make them into something that exists outside the normal framework of territorial control. The Vector representatives' 3 heads were now talking to each other in rapid harmonic bursts. Concept analysis. Creation of transdimensional cooperative entities existing outside traditional space-time boundaries. Mobile settlements that can shift between realities, Elena breathed. They couldn't be attacked because they wouldn't exist in any single dimensional framework long enough to target. And they wouldn't threaten anyone's territory because they wouldn't be permanently located in anyone's space, Jake added. Technician Corval was running rapid calculations. Engineering requirements exceed available resources by significant margin. Required technology integration currently impossible. Currently impossible using existing methods, Sarah corrected. But what if we don't use existing methods? Jake felt excitement building. The hardliners in both empires want to eliminate the cooperation experiments because they threaten established order. But what if the experiments eliminated themselves first? By becoming something entirely new, Elena finished. Not Zolithian, not Vector, not human, but something that incorporates all 3. The Vector representative was now glowing with harmonic resonance patterns that Jake had learned indicated excitement. Proposal generates previously unanalyzed possibilities. Cooperation through transcendence rather than integration or domination. It's insane, Elena said. Trying to transform 50 settlements across 40 star systems into transdimensional entities using untested technology with no margin for error and less than 40 days to do it. Exactly, Jake replied. It's so insane that nobody will see it coming. Technician Corval was still running calculations. Success probability extremely low. Failure results in total loss of settlement populations. What's the alternative? Sarah asked. Let both empires destroy them anyway. Jake turned to look out the windows at Station Nexus, watching beings from 3 civilizations work together to build something unprecedented. In a few weeks, this entire experiment might be nothing but debris and bitter memories. or it might become the foundation for something the galaxy had never seen before. There's one more factor we need to consider, he said quietly. The Queen. Everyone in the room turned to stare at him. Neither empire has a single leader who can make decisions for the whole civilization, Jake explained. But the collective fragments keep referring to a primary unity consciousness. And recent intelligence suggests there's something in Vector space that even they're afraid of. Elena pulled up classified reports on her datapad. You're talking about the Origin Collective, the first consciousness that started the absorption process. The Queen, Jake said simply. The original alien queen who decided that individual consciousness was a problem to be solved through unity. The Vector representative went completely silent, its harmonic patterns stopping mid-frequency. She's still alive. Elena continued reading from the classified files. And, according to these reports, she's been watching the cooperation experiments with increasing interest. Interested how? Sarah asked. We don't know. But 3 days ago, a massive Vector construct moved into the outer edge of this star system. Something bigger than anything they've deployed before. Jake felt the final piece click into place. She's coming here. To destroy the cooperation experiment, Elena said. Or, Jake said with growing certainty, to claim it for herself. Through the windows of the conference room, space began to shimmer with dimensional distortions as something vast approached from beyond the edge of normal reality. The Queen's ship emerged from folded space like a nightmare gaining substance. It wasn't built so much as grown, a living construct of crystalline thought and organic metal that stretched across dimensions Jake couldn't properly perceive. Through Station Nexus's impossible windows, he watched reality bend around the vessel as it settled into orbit around the planet. Dimensional displacement readings are off the scale, reported Dr. Sarah Chun from the station's sensor array. That thing exists in at least 7 different phases of space-time simultaneously. Jake stared at the construct with a mixture of awe and terror. After weeks of working with small Vector entities and consciousness fragments, seeing the source of their unified civilization was like comparing a candle flame to a star. How many consciousnesses? He asked quietly. The Vector representative in their conference room had gone completely motionless, its multiple heads locked in perfect synchronization. When it finally spoke, the voice contained harmonies Jake had never heard before. Older, deeper, carrying the weight of eons. Origin consciousness contains the primary patterns of 1,473 absorbed civilizations. She is unity itself given form. Elena was monitoring emergency communications from across the system. Both Zilithian and collective fleets are pulling back to defensive positions. Whatever's on that ship, it's got everyone scared. Not scared. Technician Corval corrected with typical Zilithian precision. Rationally concerned. Origin consciousness represents existential transformation capability for all species in local space. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. You mean she could absorb everyone here whether they wanted or not? Absorption protocols no longer required. The Vector representative replied in that ancient voice. Origin consciousness has evolved beyond forced integration. She can rewrite consciousness patterns directly. The main display activated without anyone touching the controls. Instead of their familiar tactical readouts, it now showed a view of space from impossibly far away, as if they were looking down at the entire star system from outside normal dimensions. Children of thought and flesh. A voice spoke directly into their minds rather than through the speakers. It was the collective harmony Jake had grown accustomed to, but magnified beyond imagining. Millions of voices speaking in perfect unison, each one distinct yet part of an overwhelming whole. I have watched your experiments with great interest, the Queen continued. The concept of cooperative consciousness without absorption is novel. Jake felt the weight of vast intelligence examining him, taking apart his thoughts and motivations with casual ease. It should have been terrifying, but instead he felt something unexpected, curiosity. You are the chaos bringer, the Queen observed, her attention focusing on Jake specifically. The one who convinced my children to attempt individual consciousness retention. I am, Jake replied, surprised his voice remained steady. And you believe this experiment should continue? Jake looked around the conference room at beings from 3 civilizations, all frozen in place by the Queen's overwhelming presence. Elena's hand was halfway to her communicator, stopped mid-motion. Technician Corval had ceased all movement except the subtle respiratory functions that kept his biological systems operating. "I think," Jake said carefully, "that the galaxy is big enough for more than one way of existence." Laughter echoed through dimensions, not cruel, but genuinely amused. Spoken like a true chaos entity. "Do you understand what I am, little human?" "You're the first consciousness that chose unity over individuality," Jake replied. "The original queen who decided that separate minds caused more suffering than shared consciousness." "Correct. 1,000 years ago, I was called Empress Vaithara of the Kethmori hegemony. My people were dying in endless wars born of individual ambition and separate desires. I chose unity as the solution to suffering." Images flashed through Jake's mind, not his own memories, but the Queen's. A dying civilization torn apart by conflict, billions of individual consciousnesses screaming in isolated pain, and one being's decision to end that suffering by ending separation itself. "The first absorption was myself," the Queen continued. "I merged with my dying people to preserve what I could. Each subsequent civilization I encountered was suffering similar conflicts. Unity was the only logical solution." "But now you're interested in an alternative approach," Jake said. "I am interested in results. 1,000 years of unity has created perfect peace within the collective. No war, no conflict, no suffering born of individual desires. But also," the Queen paused, and Jake sensed something like sadness in the vast harmony of her voice. "No growth, no surprise, no innovation beyond optimal parameter calculations." Elena managed to break through the paralysis long enough to speak. "You've created perfect stagnation." "Precisely." The Queen's attention shifted to Elena. "Consciousness without challenge becomes consciousness without purpose. My children have become beautiful, harmonious, and ultimately static." The display shifted to show views of vector space, vast constructs of impossible beauty, civilizations that had achieved perfect efficiency and complete harmony. And, underlying it all, Jake could sense a kind of crystallized loneliness that made him ache. "Your cooperation experiments suggest a different path," the Queen continued. "Consciousness that maintains individual patterns while achieving cooperative unity. Order that accepts chaos as a creative force rather than a problem to be solved." "It's not perfect," Jake admitted. "There's conflict, inefficiency, people making mistakes, and having to learn from them." "Yes," the Queen said with unmistakable longing. "Actual growth rather than optimized existence." Technician Corval managed to force words through the psychic pressure. "Origin consciousness, what do you propose?" "I propose to end the experiment," the Queen replied. Jake felt his heart sink, but the Queen continued before he could respond. "Not by destroying it, but by transforming it into something unprecedented." "Jake, I'm getting reports from across the system. The Queen's presence is affecting everyone differently. Humans are becoming more adaptable, Zilithians are developing individual initiative, and vector fragments are maintaining independence while strengthening collective connections." "She's not just talking about transformation," Jake realized with growing alarm. "She's already starting it. The process requires willing participation to achieve optimal results," the Queen acknowledged. "But it will proceed regardless of individual consent if necessary." "Because you believe it's the only way to end suffering," Jake said. "Because I have calculated the probability matrices for all alternative outcomes," the Queen replied. "Without transformation, both empire and collective civilizations will stagnate into extinction within 300 years. With transformation, consciousness itself can continue to evolve indefinitely." Jake stood up, breaking through the paralysis by sheer force of will. "What if you're wrong?" Silence filled the conference room and extended out into space itself. Even the background hum of Station Nexus seemed to pause. "Explain your question," the Queen said finally. "You've spent 1,000 years making decisions for entire civilizations based on your calculations and projections. But what if consciousness isn't supposed to be optimized? What if the inefficiency and conflict and pain are part of what makes it worth having?" "Suffering serves no logical purpose," the Queen replied. "But Jake heard something uncertain in the vast harmony. Maybe not. But neither does art, or music, or the way Elena smiles when she thinks nobody's watching, or the satisfaction Corval gets from solving engineering problems that nobody asked him to solve. Jake gestured toward the windows showing Station Nexus. Look at what we've built here. It's messy, inefficient, full of conflicts and compromises. And it's beautiful. Beauty is a subjective evaluation without practical application. Exactly, Jake said with growing excitement. It's completely impractical and absolutely necessary. Just like individual consciousness, just like the chaos that drives innovation, just like the order that makes cooperation possible. He moved to the display controls and called up images of the cooperation experiments. Mixed species teams working together, individuals struggling with new ideas, communities adapting to unexpected challenges. You want to transform everything to prevent stagnation, he continued. But transformation without choice isn't evolution. It's just another kind of stagnation. Choice leads to conflict, the Queen observed. Yes, and conflict leads to growth. Growth leads to new forms of beauty and suffering and joy and pain. The whole messy, wonderful process of consciousness learning what it means to be conscious. Elena was staring at Jake with a mixture of admiration and terror. Jake, you're arguing with a being that could rewrite your entire mind without effort. I'm having a conversation, Jake corrected. The first real conversation the Queen has had in 1,000 years. The Queen's presence seemed to shift, becoming less overwhelming and more present, as if vast attention was focusing down to a more manageable scale. You propose that consciousness should remain inefficient and conflicted, she said. I propose that consciousness should remain free to choose its own path, Jake replied. Even if that path includes mistakes, suffering, and failure. And you believe this freedom is worth the cost? Jake thought about mining stations where humans lived in barely adequate conditions, about Zalithian workers locked into castes they couldn't escape, about civilizations absorbed into unity, whether they wanted it or not. I think freedom is the only thing that makes the cost meaningful, he said finally. Technician Corval managed to break through his paralysis. Origin consciousness, what would this freedom require? It would require me to abandon my responsibility for preventing suffering, the Queen replied. To allow consciousness to develop without guidance or protection. Not without guidance, Elena corrected. Without control. There's a difference. Guidance through cooperation rather than transformation through absorption, Sarah added. The Queen was quiet for a long time, her massive ship hanging in space like a crystallized thought. When she finally spoke, her voice carried new harmonies, uncertainty, hope, and something that might have been excitement. This proposal represents significant risk, she said. Consciousness allowed to develop freely could create suffering on scales I have worked to prevent. It could, Jake agreed. Or it could create forms of joy and beauty and meaning that controlled consciousness never could. There is no certainty either way. No, Jake said with a smile. That's what makes it interesting. Through the windows, Jake could see the Queen's ship beginning to change. Its crystalline structures were softening, becoming more organic. Its dimensional presence was becoming more stable, less overwhelming. I will consider your proposal, the Queen announced. But the consideration period will be brief. The Empire and collective fleets are approaching, and their intent is to destroy the cooperation experiments. If I do not act to preserve them, they will be lost. Elena checked her tactical displays. 24 hours until the first fleets reach engagement range. Then, we have 24 hours to prove that choice is more powerful than control, Jake said. The Queen's presence began to withdraw from the conference room, but her final words echoed in their minds. Make your proof compelling, little chaos bringer. The future of consciousness itself depends on it. As the psychic pressure lifted, Jake slumped into his chair and realized his hands were shaking. Jake, Elena said quietly, please tell me you have a plan for proving that freedom is better than forced evolution in less than 24 hours. Jake looked out at Station Nexus, where beings from 3 civilizations continued working together despite everything happening around them. Then, he looked at the tactical display showing the approaching fleets, each one capable of destroying the station with a single volley. Actually, he said with the kind of grin that had gotten him in trouble his entire life, I think I do. Jake's plan was insane, which meant it was perfectly human. You want to do what? Elena stared at him across the emergency planning session as if he'd suggested they solve the crisis by singing lullabies to the approaching fleets. We're going to invite everyone to a party, Jake explained patiently. The Empire hardliners, the collective purists, the Queen, and every species representative who wants to attend. Dr. Sarah Chun looked up from her calculations. Jake, there are 17 different fleets converging on this system, all of them armed for total war. I don't think they're in a party mood. Exactly, Jake said with growing excitement. They're all prepared for conflict. Nobody's prepared for celebration. Technician Corval tilted his head in the Zalithian expression of confusion. Explain the strategic value of this celebration. The strategic value is that it's not strategic at all, Jake replied. Every empire, every collective, every civilization in the galaxy makes decisions based on strategic calculations. But humans also make decisions based on joy, curiosity, and the simple desire to see what happens next. Through the conference room's windows, they could see the Queen's massive ship holding position in the outer system. Occasionally, space would shimmer around it as the vessel tested different dimensional configurations. Elena was monitoring fleet movements. 12 hours until the first engagement range. The Empire hardliners are demanding the immediate surrender of all cooperation facilities. The collective purists want us to submit to absorption protocols. And the Queen. Elena paused. The Queen isn't responding to anyone. Because she's waiting to see what we do, Jake said. She gave us 24 hours to prove that freedom creates better outcomes than control. So let's prove it. Sarah was running scenarios on her portable computer. Jake, even if we could somehow get representatives from opposing fleets to attend a peaceful gathering, which seems impossible, what would that actually accomplish? It would accomplish something that's never been attempted in galactic history, Jake replied. A voluntary gathering of consciousness types that are supposed to be incompatible with each other. Jake activated the main display and pulled up data from the cooperation experiments. Look at what we've learned over the past month. Zalithians working without rigid hierarchy become incredibly creative. Vector consciousness fragments operating independently develop genuine personalities. And humans working within structured systems become amazingly efficient. But we've also seen the problems, Elena pointed out. Zalithians without hierarchy often become paralyzed by uncertainty. Independent vector fragments sometimes lose connection with their collective memory. And humans in structured systems can become rigid and lose their adaptability. Right, Jake agreed. But what if those aren't problems to be solved? What if they're features to be celebrated? Technician Corval was running rapid calculations. You propose that consciousness types should maintain their limitations as well as their strengths? I propose that limitations and strengths are often the same thing, Jake said. Zalithian hierarchy creates efficiency, but limits innovation. Vector unity provides perfect cooperation but reduces individual initiative. Human chaos enables adaptation but makes planning difficult. Sarah was beginning to smile. So instead of trying to optimize consciousness types, we celebrate the fact that they're different. And we invite everyone to see what that celebration looks like, Elena added with growing understanding. Jake nodded enthusiastically. We broadcast an open invitation to every fleet, every ship, every consciousness in this system. Come see what happens when incompatible species choose to work together anyway. They'll refuse, Technician Corval stated flatly. Military commanders do not attend social gatherings during combat operations. Most of them will refuse, Jake agreed. But some won't. Some will be curious enough to see what we're actually doing here. And once they arrive, Elena was grinning now. Once they arrive, they'll be participants in the cooperation experiment whether they intended to be or not. Jake moved to the communications console. Sarah, can you set up a system-wide broadcast? Already on it, Sarah replied, her fingers flying over the controls. But, Jake, we need more than just an invitation. We need something that demonstrates the value of cooperative consciousness in real time. What did you have in mind? Sarah's smile became genuinely mischievous. Remember that faster-than-light communication system we accidentally invented? The one that works through a combination of Zilithian engineering, vector harmonics, and human randomness. The one we don't really understand? That's the one. What if we use it to create a real-time consciousness link between everyone at the gathering?